what's going to happen next to Thai politics? Thailand at the moment seems to be suffering from a very serious case of paralysis, not being able to move forward and not in a position to move backward either. I talked to Dr. Fuadi Pisuwan last night. Fuadi is a full-time lecturer at Thammasat University on International Affairs. His analysis of the current situation facing the Thai government, headed by Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra, is quite interesting. 6 points he makes, and his proposed solutions should be a topic of interest and discussions among the Thai people in various circles, especially for the Prime Minister herself. Let's dig into what we discussed last night and let Ping and Pong, my AI team, dive deep into it. Hi, Ping and Pong.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into a really critical topic: the ongoing political paralysis in Thailand.
Right. It feels like things have been stuck for a while.
Exactly. And our mission here is to pull out the most important insights from this really fascinating conversation Suthichai Yoon had with Dr. Fuadi Pitsuwan. He's an expert on international affairs. And they laid out some, frankly, surprising facts and perspectives, stuff that really helps us understand the current Thai dilemma, and what it means for the country's future, maybe even its place on the world stage.
And what's really interesting, I think, in Dr. Fuadi's analysis is how he kind of pulls together all these complex threads, internal stuff, external pressures.
Yeah.
He connects the dots between personal interests, national policy, even global trends. It really makes you ask, doesn't it, for you, the listener, how does a country move forward when its political gears just seem completely jammed?
That's the big question.
So we'll explore Dr. Fuadi's key points, try to help you see not just what's happening, but maybe why it matters and what some of the ways forward might look like.
Okay, so let's jump right in then. Dr. Fuadi starts with a pretty bold claim, suggesting the Prime Minister is facing a significant conflict of interest. What's he getting at there?
Well, yeah, it's a strong opening. Dr. Fuadi argues that essentially the Prime Minister's personal information is being held as collateral, maybe is a strong word, but leverage.
Leverage? By whom?
By Hun Sen, the former long-serving leader of Cambodia. And this, he says, makes it incredibly difficult for the Thai PM to act freely, especially on really crucial things like security and foreign policy. Think of it like a subtle but pretty powerful constraint on his actions.
That's quite something. This idea that personal issues could intersect with national interests like that.
Yeah.
Does Dr. Fuadi give any specific examples of how this alleged conflict might actually, play out?
He does. He brings up two really compelling cases, I think. First, he points to the assassination of Rim Kim Ya, a French citizen.
Right. That was a controversial one. Ties between Thailand and Cambodia, political charged.
Yeah, exactly. And Dr. Fuadi suggests this incident could potentially be traced to certain individuals. Now, theoretically, he says Thailand could take Hun Sen to the World Court over it.
Okay.
But then he asks the question, would the Thai Prime Minister actually dare to do that?
Yeah.
Given the potential maybe for Hun Sen to release more tapes or information about the Shinawatra family.
The family connection. So a fear of personal fallout overriding potential national action. What's the second example?
The second one he mentions revolves around these scam centers operating in the region.
Big problem, though.
Huge. And he brings up Hun Sen's son's company, alleging involvement in money laundering connected to these operations. Now, Thailand could pursue legal action, right? Freeze assets, work with international courts.
Makes sense.
But again, Dr. Fuadi questions if the PM would risk the personal blowback that might come from pursuing that kind of action vigorously. It's a really tough spot, he implies, where fighting crime, which is clearly in Thailand's interest, might clash with the PM's own vulnerabilities.
So Dr. Fuadi is essentially painting a picture where what's best for Thailand, the nation, might not line up with what's best or perhaps safest for the Prime Minister and his family.
That's the core of it.
I mean, if a leader's personal vulnerabilities are potentially being held hostage like that, how can a nation move forward, especially when it affects things like national security, foreign policy, these critical areas?
Well, that's the crux of his argument, isn't it? It's not just about policy choices anymore. It's about these underlying motivations, these constraints that might be limiting the leader's ability to act purely in the country's best interest.
Okay, so beyond this conflict of interest issue, Dr. Fuadi also talks about what he calls the prime minister's fitness to rule. What does he mean by that? How does he assess the PM's leadership capacity?
Well, he seems to think the PM might be sincere, wanting to solve problems. But he observes that the communication style, the way negotiations are handled, sometimes reveals, let's say, leadership shortcomings.
Like what specifically?
He specifically criticizes the PM for publicly denigrating the army, bad-mouthing them, basically. And doing that, Dr. Fuadi says, exposes the country's internal divisions to its, quote, enemies. He sees that as creating a really deep wound, both for the PM personally and for how the country is seen.
That is quite a strong criticism. But does he only point fingers at the PM, or does he see issues on the military side of that relationship too?
Oh, absolutely. He's quite balanced there, actually.
Yeah.
While he's critical of the PM's handling of the Army relationship, he also makes a crucial counterpoint. He says the Army shouldn't make the PM feel like they're adversaries.
Right.
It's their professional duty, he argues, to support the Prime Minister because he came into power through Parliament. He was actually glad, he said, to see the Army express support after that leaked tape incident recently. Called it the professional thing to do.
Okay, so some professionalism shown there.
But then he immediately points out the Army's misstep in cheering a specific general right after that leak. He called that wrong. Unproductive. So he's really showing this complex dynamic, you see, where both sides seem to have made missteps in how they deal with each other publicly and maybe internally, and it all just contributes to this feeling of paralysis.
So it really isn't about taking sides, is it? It sounds like both the government and the military have their own internal issues, their own stumbles that are feeding into this unstable situation.
Precisely. And Dr. Fuadi emphasizes that, we don't need to support any single faction here. They all seem to have problems. His advice is more about understanding the different groups involved, especially the protesters, what brings them together, what divides them.
Okay, so given this instability and the protests happening, what worries does Dr. Fuadi have about how this deadlock might end or continue?
Well, he sounds quite concerned, actually, particularly about some voices among the protesters who are calling for, another coup or some kind of judicial intervention.
Right, that history is always there.
Is, and he explicitly reminds us, and you, the listener, about the painful lessons from the past. Specifically, 2006, 2010, times when protests led to these political deadlocks, constitutional crises, and then ultimately
coups or judicial takeovers.
Exactly. Military coups or judicial interventions that basically short-circuited the democratic process.
So it's a really stark warning then about the unintended consequences. How actions taken now could potentially drag Thailand back into that cycle of non-democratic interventions. So what's the democratic path forward, according to Dr. Fuadi?
He's very clear on advocating for solutions within the democratic framework. He suggests the best immediate option for the country might actually be for the prime minister to resign or perhaps dissolve parliament.
Oh yeah, call new elections.
Right. But then he immediately circles back to that conflict of interest problem we talked about earlier. He says doing either of those things, resigning or dissolving parliament, would likely expose the PM to various legal cases, and he'd lose control over key ministries like defense and foreign affairs, which he currently holds.
So the democratic options are difficult for the leader personally.
That's what Dr. Fuadi argues, yeah. It makes those democratic solutions really hard for the current leadership to embrace, which just kind of keeps the deadlock going.
And this instability, this internal focus, how does it affect Thailand's standing internationally? Dr. Fuadi challenges the traditional friends to all foreign policy, doesn't he? The old bamboo diplomacy. Calls it ineffective now.
He does. He argues it's time for Thailand to be more assertive, to stand firm on its national interests, even if that means sometimes having adversaries on specific issues. He thinks that old approach just isn't cutting it anymore in today's complex world.
So less bending like bamboo, more standing firm on core interests.
Kind of, yeah. Take Cambodia again. He says sticking to national interests might mean being at odds with Hun Sen on certain things, but and this is important, he separates that from the Cambodian people. Thailand has strong links there. especially with labor.
Right. So it's not about being hostile to the whole country.
No, it's about defining and defending specific national interests, even when it's awkward politically.
That does sound like a pretty big shift from how things have usually been done. Does he give an example where the friends to all approach actually backfired, caused real problems?
Yeah, and this one is quite stark, actually. He brings up the Uyghur case.
Oh, yes.
When Thailand sent about 40 Uyghurs back to China. Remember, these are people facing persecution. That action, Dr. Fuadi says, severely damaged Thailand's standing with the United States. Made it really difficult for Thai officials to even get meetings to negotiate effectively. He claims at least 3 Thai ministers actually can't travel to the U.S. because of it.
Wow, really? 3 minutes?
That's his claim. And it compromises Thailand's ability to function as a full team Thailand in international talks. Weakens its overall diplomatic muscle. He even notes that Thai foreign ministry officials are often very capable.
Right.
But their potential is sort of locked, he says, by the political instability and this recurring conflict of interest issue at the top.
So it's not just a theoretical shift in policy he's calling for. There are real, tangible consequences to the current approach, impacting Thailand's ability to operate on the global stage. And how does he link all this political turmoil back to the economy?
Yeah, he zooms out to look at the past decade, and honestly, it's not a pretty picture he paints. He highlights that Thailand's economy has been one of the slowest growing in ASEAN.
Really? Behind who?
Significantly behind countries like Vietnam, Indonesia. And he attributes this directly to the years of political instability, what he calls legal warfare.
Yeah.
Using lawsuits as political weapons. And of course, the repeated coups. He argues this isn't just some abstract economic discussion. It has real-world impacts on ordinary Thai people.
And what's the long-term effect for the average person, for society?
Well, this is a really crucial point, especially for you, the listener, to consider. Thailand is aging rapidly as a society.
Right. The demographics are shifting.
Exactly. And an aging society needs a strong, growing economy to support welfare, healthcare, social services for its elderly population. But this prolonged political turmoil, he argues, actively prevents the kind of economic growth needed to meet those future challenges.
So the political fighting today is undermining the ability to care for people tomorrow.
That's the connection he makes.
Yeah.
And he specifically warns the current protesters. Think about these lessons from history. Be incredibly careful, he urges, not to accidentally create an opening for yet another judicial intervention or a military coup or even invoking a royally appointed prime minister. All things that would just derail democracy and economic stability even further.
So the political paralysis isn't just about who holds power today. It has these deep, long-lasting consequences for the economy, for society's well-being, especially as Thailand gets older and needs more resources. It really highlights the urgency, doesn't it?
It does. And this leads to what I think is maybe his most thought-provoking point. He argues that all this constant political turmoil has basically consumed Thailand's cognitive space.
Cognitive space. What does he mean by that?
He means that instead of the country's best minds, its leaders, its thinkers, focusing on the really critical future challenges, things like AI, and not just AI, but AGI, artificial general intelligence.
Which some people think is only 5-10 years away.
Right, with potentially massive consequences like AI-driven conflict that people like Kissinger have warned about, or thinking about stablecoins, digital currencies, or developing smart aging society policies like Singapore or Japan have done.
Or climate change.
Or climate change. Huge issue. Instead of focusing on those things, Thailand's brightest are stuck debating domestic political squabbles. Is the PM capable? What will the protests achieve? Will the courts intervene? Is another coup coming?
It's like the whole country is so caught up in the day-to-day political soap opera that it can't lift its head to see these massive waves heading its way. What strikes you most about this idea of cognitive space?
Well, Dr. Fuadi suggests a core part of the solution is about leadership integrity. Leaders needing the self-awareness to know when their personal interests clash too much with the national interest. And having the integrity to step aside when that happens.
Like knowing when to quit.
Exactly. He points to Japanese political culture where leaders often resign over mistakes as sort of a cultural value.
Yeah.
This value of self-awareness, knowing your limits, he believes, is seriously lacking in Thailand.
That's a profound point about leadership and accountability, really. So given how entrenched things seem, what pathways forward does Dr. Fuadi actually see? Any realistic ones?
Well, democratically, dissolving parliament and holding elections is the ideal path, right? Return power to the people.
Yeah.
But then he points to the opinion polls. Like the NIDA polls, they show the Move Forward Party still quite strong, that orange wave support.
Right, the Progressive Party.
And because of that, he argues, it's pretty unlikely that the people currently in power would choose to dissolve parliament because they might predict a bad outcome for themselves in an election.
So fear of losing makes elections less likely.
Seems to be his reading. So, paradoxically, he suggests the PM resigning, which might be safer for the PM personally regarding those potential legal cases, might actually be the most gentle way forward for the nation right now to break the deadlock without risking upheaval.
Interesting. He also mentioned General Prayut still polling relatively well in those NADI polls. How does he explain that, especially given the youth push for change?
Yeah, that's fascinating. Dr. Fuadi connects General Prayut's lingering popularity. Remember, he led the last coup to a desire for stability and sovereignty among certain groups, especially older generations.
A desire for order.
Exactly. And he points out this strongman appeal isn't unique to Thailand. It's a global thing right now. He cites Prabowo in Indonesia, Marcos Jr. in the Philippines, even Trump in the U.S. In uncertain times, he suggests that desire for stability can sometimes even push younger people towards more conservative figures, despite the generally progressive trend among Thai youth.
We talked about the military's role earlier in relation to the PM. What does Dr. Fuadi say about their broader function in a healthy democracy, given their history of interventions?
He really stresses the importance of civilian control of the military. That's fundamental for democracy, he says. When the military acts professionally, supports the elected government, even one they don't agree with, it builds public trust.
And lets them do their actual job.
Precisely. Lets them focus on their real duties, like defending against external threats. He brings up cyber threats. Says Thailand was ranked 4th globally for cyber attacks in 2023.
4th globally. That's high.
Very high. Yet, he claims, Thailand's cyber army often seems more focused internally than on external threats. He calls that a misallocation of vital resources. He does note, interestingly, that sometimes on the ground, like dealing with ethnic groups in Myanmar near the border, the military might have better info or be easier to deal with than civilian agencies, even though things like cross-border health issues should be civilian responsibilities. It just shows how tangled things are. And he laments that other ASEAN countries used to really admire Thailand's diplomatic skill, but that respect has faded.
So it really sounds like he sees Thailand punching below its weight on the world stage because of all these internal knots. Does he see a way for Thailand to regain some of that influence?
Well, he mentions this internal debate in Thailand. Is it a small state just reacting to events, or is it actually a middle power capable of shaping agenda?
Right. What potential does it have?
Dr. Fuadi seems to believe, along with many younger diplomats and academics, he suggests, that Thailand does have more agency, more potential than its current leadership is letting it exercise. He points to areas like gender diversity, where Thailand is actually quite advanced globally. That could be real soft power, he says, but it needs genuine government commitment to make it happen.
So pulling all this together, what does it mean for you, the listener, trying to make sense of this really complex picture? It seems to come back to that idea of cognitive space, doesn't it? Not just for the leaders, but for the whole country.
I think so. If everyone's constantly caught up in the day-to-day political drama, the infighting, the speculation, when does anyone get the bandwidth to even think about, let alone start tackling these huge looming challenges that are going to define the future?
And Dr. Fuadi leaves us with a final, quite provocative thought on that. He questions the role of universities, of civil society. Are they still providing the space for deep national discussions on things like AI or climate change?
He suggests maybe not. That academics are maybe overwhelmed, and the media gets so focused on the daily political battles.
The noise drowns out the signal.
Yeah, exactly. It drowns out these deeper, more fundamental conversations. So the question he leaves hanging, really, is for everyone. How does Thailand shift its focus? How do you move from the short-term political fights to the long-term strategic needs of the country? That's the real dilemma. Thanks for following Suthichai Live English Podcast. Stay tuned for the next episode. We are Suthichai's AI team. I am Ping, and I am Pong.
Thank you very much, Ping and Pong. And this is what Fuadi Pitsuwan and myself discussed on what's next for Thai politics. It's a big question, and we will have to try every possible way to find the best options or the least bad options. Thank you for following Suthichai Live English Podcast. Until the next episode.